Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashish Kaushal, CEO of staffing firm Hire Talent and co-founder of Consciously Unbiased, a movement to build belonging in the workplace. We have a special LinkedIn Live conversation today about the future of procurement. Our guests are here to talk about how procurement can be a business accelerator rather than a bottleneck. Our special guests are Sharonda Gromes, managing partner of DSG Consulting LLC, Sanaya Alexis, managing partner of Catapult, Linda Aaron, VP of Manufacturing at Genpact. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
Great to see you all. So I wanted to start off with, what do you see business leaders outside of procurement consistently misunderstanding about the function of procurement?
Anyone want to go first on this one? I'll jump in.
I can start.
Go ahead, Linda. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, one of the challenges we have in procurement is procurement has been traditionally seen as a cost center activity, right? Not as a strategic partner or alignment with total cost of ownership. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have in procurement, right, from our external stakeholders, is that they don't see necessarily the value that we can add from a strategic perspective and how we can align, right, to their AOPs, OP strategies annually. And so I would say that's one of the challenges that we have in procurement.
For sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as someone who's been on both sides, so I'm unique in that I've been in procurement, but I've also been the business person using procurement. I think it's two-sided. I definitely think there's some misconceptions about it, we being reactive and admin, but I also think it's also procurement also leveling up and earning that trust as well. Yeah. So we can't just say, well, we're not in the room and we're not at the table if we haven't really earned the spot there. So I think it's a two-way thing. In companies where procurement and the business are interconnected, have made some deliberate actions to build that relationships and build the architecture within the company that allows procurement to be a strategic advisor from that standpoint.
100%.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And just to piggyback on what Sienna just said here is when that integration doesn't happen, procurement, in my opinion, is purely seen as a purchasing function. And so that strategic part of strategic sourcing is not leveraged and leaves the organization, the procurement organization, to be seen as very tactical, cut my PO, look over this order form that I've already negotiated, more rubber stamping than partnering and assisting with the purchase.
Yeah, and I also think procurement, there's a misunderstanding where people think that procurement's job is to say no, but it's actually how do you get to yes, right? And how to make a working relationship. And so I think that's something that's not really highlighted enough. Marty, welcome. I wanted to ask you as well, what do you think business leaders outside of procurement consistently misunderstand about the function?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think the biggest thing that procurement leaders miss is just all of the things that we have to do behind the scenes and the cycle time that it takes to actually get their requirements to the finish line. There's a lot of research behind it. There's a lot of negotiation. There is a lot of, due diligence that needs to occur. And there are a lot of different parties that play a role in getting that information, being able to verify that information, and then being able to present it in a way that someone can understand it to get to the next level of the negotiation. Hopefully, in this regard, though, with AI now moving into our industry, that we can now be a little bit more fast to getting information to them and also be a little bit more accurate in our details of the negotiation so we can have a little bit of leverage where we never saw leverage before. So that's where I think that.
And Christina, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just agree with Marty because everything is becoming more precise and with more data that we need to provide and really provide value. And that's where everything with AI will become hopefully easier if we can touch things faster, summarize them faster, organize them in a fashionable way where we can present a clear picture to the leadership.
Absolutely. And in organizations where procurement's truly driving value, how does the relationship between procurement and the business leaders actually operate? And what separates those strategic functions from organizations that are stuck in a reactive sourcing environment?
Mm-hmm. Sienna, it looks like you're about to talk.
Sure. I think so. So I definitely think there are some clear signals in what I call high performing organizations. And maybe I'll just talk about two. And it's really not about process or policy maturity, because policy really does not drive relationship. It is the framework and the accountability that drives the relationship. And I think one thing I noticed in high performance organization is procurement is integrated into the business planning and the budget planning process. So one company I used to work for, every third quarter as the business is creating their business plans and their budgets, they're doing it with procurement. So the cost savings, the avoidances, all their initiatives are built in the budget, and the business unit and procurement have a shared accountability to reach that goal. So it's not just one procurement chasing the business to find projects. They know what's on the docket. And also they're not in this game with finance. Was that savings? Does that count? No. It's agreed upon in the beginning, and it allows the two functions to really get the work done. I think the other piece, and I think I called it out earlier, is the business acumen of the leaders in procurement are different. So they're not leading with cost savings. They're leading with margin protection and working capital, speed to market. They're talking in the business language. Yes, there's cost savings in the background. But if you're meeting with the CFO or a manufacturing leader or a leader with R&D, you want to translate the requirements of what is important for them. So I think for me, the two things I see call out that is really being integrated into the process, which removes that reactive, and also leveling up your team to understand what your clients actually need and how to help them get there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Linda, you're...
Wow, that was so well said. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add there, right? But I think it goes back. I think as procurement leaders, right, we have an obligation to our business, right, units to work on how we're showing up, right, to try to approach the challenges that we're having from a leadership perspective, right? So I think one of the things we've done over the years, right, a lot of procurement leaders hailed through the ranks of an organization, right? They've done all of the functions, usually within supply chain, strategic sourcing. And oftentimes, I think we get caught in a cycle of just doing and being very tactical and not working on how we are positioning ourselves, right? And what we're bringing to these conversations. Now, a couple of things that were said, right? At the end of the day, procurement does have a significant impact on the bottom line, right? And so being able to align, right, with having the CPO and the CFO on the same page is critical, right? Because during those planning, for your annual performance, for your annual AOPs, if you don't have those conversations, you're not going to budget, right, appropriately. Depending on the size of the company, then you may even have significant impacts, right, to the bottom line. And even as a publicly traded company, right, there are just so many more significant challenges and regulatory type features, right, to how we perform procurement. And so those are the types of things I think we as leaders in procurement, we need to position ourselves to be seen as a trusted partner. We need to educate ourselves on the leading indicators, right, externally that are impacting our businesses. And we need to make sure that we're tying in very closely with finance to make sure that whatever we're planning, we can actually attain. And oftentimes, right, in my experience, what I've seen is we get called to the conversation way too late, right? We're not a part of the S&OP process. We're not a part of the category strategy, right? We're coming in after. And it's just, hey, you just need to execute and place POs. And there's a lot more to procurement. As Sharonda stated, right, strategic sourcing, right? That is where we shine. That is where we're able to plug in with the stakeholders. We're able to align to the bottom line. and we're able to drive significant value, right, E to E within the supply chain. Interestingly enough, Sharonda, she and I had a conversation about a week ago, right? And she's a domain expert in indirect procurement. And I'm a domain expert, right, in direct procurement. And so understanding the differences between those two is very different, right? We have from a direct procurement standpoint, right, we're dealing with manufacturing, we're dealing with discrete, indiscrete, right, manufacturing operations, we're dealing with PSYOPs, plan for every part, right, category commoditization strategies. There's so many things we're dealing with. And so when you look at procurement, it's not a one size fit all. Sharonda, on the other hand, right, we were having a conversation and she has such an in-depth understanding about SaaS, right, technologies, marketing, third party, providers that are providing different services. And when I speak to her, I am learning so much from her. And so I think it's just so critical to work on how you're showing up as a leader, right? Use your network to keep learning what's available and just, aligning very closely to your financial objectives. I know it's a lot, but those are the areas we should probably, focus on.
Definitely. No, those are great points. And Sharonda, I'd love for you to add to that as well.
I would more so bundle it all together in agreeing that in mature procurement organizations, it's more about positioning and timing, right? Very much like Sienna said, procurement is at the table at ideation in many times in those mature organizations. We are helping shape the strategy and not simply execute at the 11th hour, because procurement is bringing in the right suppliers, we're bringing in insights, we're sharing trends, welcoming innovation and capability, and those things help structure the strategy. It helps give it more meat, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I will say, to add to Sharonda's, we are really in the middle of innovation right now, and procurement is really leading in kind of which AI agents do we want in our company? How do you want to structure that? And like right now, I am being asked to pull a spend. How much are we spending on AI agents, right? For every SaaS that we have. And I think that's really where future is going, and where procurement can position themselves to add a lot more value, and then to show leadership. How much are we spending on AI agents or AI overall? Are we actually utilizing for the dollars that we're spending, and how to optimize those dollars to get the most productivity and the use out of AI?
Interesting. Definitely, for sure. I didn't think about the AI agent budgets and things like that. So that's definitely.
And and now, like, this is just procurement, right? But how do you measure that if you don't have a line item that says AI, but it's embedded in a software, right?
Yeah.
So those are type of questions that we are trying to decipher and see. Here is bundled, but I don't really know how much AI costs because it's overall. And here, this company, we had it before, and now they added AI agent, and now I know how much I'm paying.
100%. Marty, do you want to add to that? Any thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think, just to piggyback off of what she's recently said, on the flip side of that, just thinking about AI agents as a whole within our space, it's fundamentally changing the speed of how we do business, right, in all facets. And we're removing those manual handcuffs that we used to have that used to slow things down. So, you know, from an AI agent perspective, though, how we utilize it in procurement and how I'm seeing it being utilized where I am is mainly around intake, and also doing analysis, just from an internal perspective from a procurement department. And now even bringing them into potentially being able to have guardrails on how they approve some of the tailspin contracts that are unmanaged in multiple parts of the business. So, when you start evaluating how we utilize AI agents and not only just looking at it from a vendor perspective, but how are we implementing AI agents to help us move faster in procurement, it is around evaluating those suppliers and being able to analyze those contracts and also look at benchmarking prices and look at different initiatives that we may not have just seen with our own human eyes, and now be able to help us look at negotiations a little bit differently and move to a speed of decision fairly quickly, but not even quickly, a little bit more accurately. So that's how I'm looking at AI agents in the procurement department, and hopefully other people are on the call looking at it the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the biggest untapped opportunities is supplier innovation, supplier-driven innovation. How can procurement move beyond transactions and build a supplier ecosystem that actually creates a competitive advantage?
Yeah, if I could jump in first, like this is one of I feel like supplier innovation is so underutilized within our space, and it's mainly because procurement professionals are focused on cost because of our positioning, right? Back to that first question.
Mm-hmm.
And in organizations where the relationship is a little bit more mature and you have your procurement team exercising an SRM or a supplier relationship management model, you can tap into those key and strategic suppliers to assist you with driving innovation for your organization.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that we forget, mainly because of the speed and the workload and our capacity, is that these suppliers are working across industries. And so they have that visibility into trends and insights and problems that other organizations very similar to ours are trying to solve within a particular space. And so when you leverage those key and strategic suppliers and invite innovation, it typically produces a great ROI for that relationship, right? You have to share a little bit more with those suppliers, give them a look under the hood a little bit, helping them understand business priorities and strategies, and also give them your problems and not just look at it from the perspective of this supplier is trying to get more money out of me, right? It becomes a different relationship building exercise for you. But when you tap into your suppliers, you then welcome a richer ecosystem to your stakeholders. It's no longer procurement just managing supplier lists, it's becoming a gateway to innovation and competitive advantage for the stakeholders.
So what you're saying is basically just like you want procurement to have a seat at the table in the beginning of the process rather than after. If you bring a supplier in at the beginning of the process, you might get some innovation that you didn't realize.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be RFP, RFP, RFP. I really think that that's where a lot of procurement folks get their head stuck in the sand, right? Like that's not the only toolkit in our toolbox. And if we, again, leverage that ecosystem and leverage our strategic suppliers, you're going to start to get a different reaction, not only from your supplier base, but also from your stakeholders. So yes, sometimes bringing a partner to the table is your advantage, and it's okay that that partner be a supplier.
Yeah.
And if I can just add something, in my previous role, actually, I've had a supplier where we did POC, proof of concept, for them to build a contracts database. And I actually helped them build contracts database. That way, I got exactly what I wanted with the contracts that we have, because my contracts database was a P drive with just a lot of PDFs, no report that I could get, right?
Wow.
And I've helped my supplier. I was one of their first 5 customers. They built exactly what I want. I helped them, met with the architecture team. We designed the interface together, everything to make sure that we can actually market that. It is a proof of concept. Then they have a big company name on their proof of concept, and they can go and have a booth at the next conference and get more customers, and then we can showcase the work that we've done together. So you can be innovative in procurement. It's just how you want to take it, really. And you can take that small supplier and really grow them, and they will be wonderful to work with. You will be their top priority, and you get what you want. So it's a win-win for both sides.
Win-win, yeah. And you're a customer of choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And the one thing I want to add, I totally agree with Christina and Sharonda. I also want to say This really goes hand in hand with a robust supplier management program because you can't do this with all suppliers. You really have to segment your suppliers and figure out who are your strategic versus your transactional suppliers you manage by compliance, and then you because there's not a light list, and then you invest in the ones where you can see the value to drive. And I would say even in the X company that I used to work for, supplier innovation was a KPI on our supplier dashboards. So when we reviewed suppliers with the business, with procurement, with the governance, we talked about it with supplier in the room. And if they're not hitting their metrics, they got to move down and we'll move somebody else up, because it is an investment on both sides to move this forward. I will also say that I would say direct procurement has done a better job with this in the past than indirect, because if you've worked at a product company, I think you've been exposed to this. But now with the event of AI innovation, there's almost so much opportunity on the indirect side as well.
Yeah. Linda, your thoughts?
I agree.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things we can leverage from supplier innovation is their technology, right? And so what that does is it helps your organization increase your capability. So you can use your suppliers' new technology, their materials, what they have done great to be able to support your supply chain. Oftentimes, your suppliers might be a lot more innovative than you are, right? An example of that, several years ago, I was a lead at a biotech startup. And we had some very lofty goals, right? We were moving from an OPEX model, right, from a CAPEX model, sorry, to an OPEX model with our continuous manufacturing systems. And what we realized is that we ran out of capital to fund the project, right? And so one of the things that I did from a strategic sourcing standpoint, I actually initiated several RFIs, right? And what I wanted to know is who is great at what it is that we're doing, right? And so that goes right back to the supplier innovation. If they're innovative, right, they're able to solve some of your internal challenges. Through that engagement, I was able to use those RFIs to help us even refine some of our internal requirements, and worked with one of those suppliers to share the IP. And so we invested in their technology and their platform. They own the actual assets and we were able to lease it from them, right? And so it was critical for me to identify where we had technological gaps, right? From a strategic sourcing standpoint with our requirements. And then from a costing, right? If they already have the innovation, that's innovation you do not have to purchase. That's innovation you do not have to source. And so I was able through that project to save over $250 million, right? Over a 6-year period, simply by sharing some IP with that supplier, working with them to improve their sterility process, right? Investing in their technology. And it was a shared partnership. So it goes back to, how are you building your supplier relationships, right? Are they a partner? And if they're a partner, you want to invest in their innovation and their technology because it benefits you. And I think, after the pandemic, we saw a great deal of that. More than ever, we needed to rely on our suppliers to outsource a lot of our own capabilities because we just weren't able to perform them, right? So I would say those are some of the areas that supplier innovation can be extremely important to your strategic sourcing initiatives, because not all times does innovation fall within your four walls.
No, absolutely. I love that. That's a great example too.
It's a great example.
Yeah, for sure. Marty, I was going to ask you, like AI and automation are rapidly changing how procurement operates. What parts of the procurement will be automated, and where would the human experience become even more valuable?
That's a good question. I talked about it a little bit earlier on, being able to be engaged around the intake area of procurement. I think we have contract management systems to manage contracts, but we don't really have really good intake. You hear about ServiceNow. A lot of companies are using ServiceNow and trying to utilize that to bring in more of a more centralized, structured intake platform. But does the buck stop there, right? How do that information gets put into the internal system of procurement? And then also, I feel like from your point of what part of procurement outside of just intake for a human perspective is around the contracts and being able to create, like I said, more of the agentic AI to maybe make some of those decisions for some of that low spend that we don't usually look at. In most big companies, coming from United, coming from the Amazons of the world, we're not looking at anything less than $100,000 on an annual basis. So you think about some of those contracts that are 50,000 or even $80,000 per year, and you look at the total contract value for that over 3 to 5 years, could significantly be a lot of money, but also provide a lot of risk.
Mhm.
And depending on what category you're in, if you're not in IT, you may not be looking at those things. So, I would recommend that looking at more of an analysis from where it handles parts of the negotiation for us, if it's a renewal or even just benchmarking pricing, or even in some cases when we're doing, RFIs or RFPs, it evaluating that and analyzing the data to provide different scenarios to say, hey, this is what we think or what I think from a AI perspective that we can provide to negotiate and bring this to the table and give us maybe one, two, or three decisions for that. But more importantly, AI is not the tell-all tale, but it should be something to include in the business to help us move faster to making a decision and protecting the overall business. There's a lot of complexities around, getting data and information real time. And I think AI will be able to help evaluate suppliers better, analyze contracts more efficiently, and
Mhm.
also be able to give us some information on benchmarking prices that are out there in multiple regions of the categories and not just one.
Great points.
Yeah, and if I could just add to Marty's, so let's say if you have a contract that's $80,000, but you look at the increase year over year, and let's say it checks the CPI index, and now you see that it's way above what it should be. Maybe then the AI will flag that and be like, okay, this is lower spend, but it really should be looked at because it's not along with the inflation with the rates that we should be paying year over year.
Mhm. No, absolutely.
Yeah. And one little quick thing that I want to add to this conversation is how I've seen AI, especially with the lower spend, assist with risk mitigation. To your point, Marty, most folks are not looking at the 100 grand and below. And it's like in the procurement policy. So in those instances, your stakeholders can sign those order forms or agree to those click through terms and conditions. Inserting AI into that process can absolutely red flag terms that the company doesn't generally accept and suggest some other things that could be mitigated from a risk perspective. And they're purely just not on the radar, and leveraging AI to become the radar, if you will.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
The,
love
the
that.
one thing I want to add, I agree with all the things. I think AI is really could be a game changer in helping move things faster for procurement. I think there's pros and cons to that. Faster meaning we'll have more access to data and
Yeah.
more decisions to be made. So
Yeah.
let's make sure we're also leveling up our procurement groups because yes, you're going to have more free time to do the strategic work. Want to make sure you're well versed to do that and make the judgment call that AI cannot make in the future. So I think it will be less on
Agreed.
managing the AI because they can automate all that sourcing stuff we hate doing anyway, but more on using your procurement judgment and expertise in the data and decisions that need to be made as well.
Yeah. No, for sure. And then in terms of governance, like how is the governance of AI and suppliers impacting you all?
I can take that one. So I will say procurement is really now being looked at overall for governance of AI as well, because if you don't have a vendor management department in your smaller company, we are everything. We are the governance and supplier strategy and everything for all of those companies. And I would say really what needs to be addressed is how are suppliers using AI for data privacy, security, and for risk exposure. So all of those terms and conditions need to be looked at, and also data protection, of course. And then I will say, you look at internally and how are you training your people how to utilize AI, right?
Mhm.
What are they placing, into their searches? Is the company approved? Is it going through portals? Did you, talk to your security CISO? What is approved through them in order for a company to utilize that? And then can you limit, right? Can your employees still, go on ChatGPT, log in into their personal account and still utilize that, right? So it's really becoming a part of an overall larger conversation throughout the entire company for risk and security. And we are having that seat at the table and then going back to suppliers and saying, this is what we're going to accept. This is not what we're not going to accept. This is how we want to train our people. What's limited, what's not limited internally for the employees to utilize and how to utilize AI. So we are really becoming the gatekeepers responsible for AI adoption, balancing innovation with strong governance and internal accountability.
And speaking of that, I just kind of want to add to that, because I know that like a lot of clients will ask us, how do we leverage AI? And then sometimes they'll say, do you agree not to use it with us? Right. And so there's a balance between allowing your vendors to use it, because there are a lot of, I think security hasn't completely been figured out with these tools. And so I think it's something to factor in. So Sharonda, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
I do agree with that. Where I've seen success in this very new landscape is creation of AI governance committees, where there's individuals from different departments within the organization, being procurement, legal, for sure, IT, and absolutely cybersecurity, if cybersecurity doesn't fall within IT. Primarily because what I'm also seeing is that suppliers are kind of sneaking in their new AI features. And it really all depends on the organization's stance on how their data is leveraged. We all want, I find it a little funny. We all want agentic, and we want, we don't want the generative AI. And the funny thing is that we also don't want to feed the agentic models. Like, don't use my data, but I want that data so that I can make decisions. And so being able to have those honest conversations with your supplier, seeking to understand how the data is being cleansed and anonymized in order to make the greater ecosystem better, and not just being, a selfish client, if you will. So having those committees to have the conversations and really discuss what the risk is, and then having conversations with your suppliers on how they use your information, and understanding what their security parameters are with your information is key. Because in my opinion, AI is going to be in just about every tool. It's that fun buzzword, our product has AI. You just want to understand what their model is, what their governance is, and then make a collective decision on how to react to that. And sometimes there are instances where you stop using a product simply because they don't have enough governance around their own AI tools. So it's just having those open conversations, taking a pause, not just contracting with the shiny new toy. You absolutely have to begrudgingly read the user manual in order to make the best decision for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I do want to add, yes, supplier risk falls under procurement, but I tell my clients AI is a cross-functional sport. So it's a red flag for me when a procurement org wants to own this, because think about when we had to do GDPR. That was a new thing. SOX, That was the new thing. So this is just one of other things.
Another
Yes,
thing.
there's a supplier risk component, but there's other functions, as Sharonda mentioned, that needs to be brought into play to make sure the governance and guardrails really protects the business. And I also think, I don't think anyone has figured it out. To your point, Ashish, I think companies they jump in the pool and then they jump out and then they flex. So everyone is still going through some iterations, and procurement just has to be agile enough to move with the business.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's definitely something we're all kind of learning together, and I do feel like one of the things we've done over the last year is like we've had everyone buy AI, but then we haven't told anyone how to use it properly, right? And so there needs to be some change management training around that, and say, this is how you leverage it, because it's somewhat, you're not getting ROI right now because it's almost like a toy for some people, right?
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And they're wasting a lot of productivity time trying to figure out how to play with the toy and what's the company's policy on what information I can put into this to create, a deliverable for my day-to-day work. So you're absolutely right with that one.
Yeah. And it's also scary because if you didn't buy the license yet as an organization, then your employees are doing it on their own on the side, and it's
right.
That's even worse. Yeah.
Behavior issue.
I will say what I'm seeing is everybody has a lot, access, but they don't really know how to use it, and really not a lot of training provided, LinkedIn learnings and things like that. But in the end, you as an individual are really there to kind of learn on your own and structure it how you need to. But also what I'm seeing is that companies now are having, savings goal and then an AI goal. So like this year or next year, you might see, you need to build 1 or 2 agents for your area or something like that. But I think that's kind of becoming more and more realistic in the future. So something as this is future of procurement to think about, and how we can position ourselves better and support leadership with everything that we have.
Yeah, it's interesting. The agent stuff you have to get trained on, right? I have a friend who built an agent and said, help me clean out my mailbox because there's too many unread messages, and so it just deleted it all.
That Claude Code and Co-work can help you.
Technically did what you asked, right?
It did what you asked. You got to be more specific.
Email bankruptcy. Okay. When you come back from vacation.
That's bad prompting.
Exactly.
So beyond governance, how might AI drive early intervention and renewals, risk, and supplier strategy? Like how are you guys leveraging that?
So I will say, if your AI can help you, let's say get reports, so you can be aware of, your bigger contracts. This needs to start being negotiated 6 to 9 months in advance, not 2 months when I get my automatic renewal notifications, if that, right? Yeah. Something where whatever tool we have, if it's very rigid and you can only put 1 or 2 fields in it, like 30-day renewal, 60-day renewal, maybe something beyond that where you would have more visibility for these larger strategic deals where it takes a lot more preparation, but really giving you overall picture from what you cannot see right now with the tools that you have. So something like that, where we could utilize it in that fashion, and also looking at like spend to those larger suppliers and optimizing. And I think now the nice thing is, I know suppliers always had a lot of data, on their side about companies that they're negotiating with. Now as procurement, we can get a little bit more deep dive with agents about the companies that we are negotiating with, to understand where are they going in the future, how can we partner better, where can we reduce costs together, right, optimize productivity, and those type of conversations. And now what I'm seeing, if a company tells me I have an AI, right, I also have an AI. So don't want to pay a lot more for all of that AI. We should see productivity on both sides, right?
Totally.
Let's have these conversations because I feel like it's a really good buzzword and you can pay a lot more money for it than when we bring value, a lot of value.
Exactly. And to piggyback on that, I would say that AI is doing a great job of data orchestration, if you will. To your point, grabbing information from multiple systems to help procurement tell a story to our stakeholders and really be able to assist them in that strategy creation. Outside of that, and also to Marty's point with the tail spend, many times within organizations, stakeholders are buying similar tools. And right now, with the assistance of AI, it's no longer a list of suppliers. You can pinpoint, which of my suppliers are currently doing the same thing, right? And then having conversations with those stakeholders to say, hey, did you know, this business unit is using this tool for this reason, and that guy over there is using this tool for that reason, and you can really bring the business together to make a collective decision, and that then results in demand management. We don't need 5 stakeholder specific tools. Maybe we just need one with, and going from basic to premium, and we've eliminated 4 other tools. So to the points of some of the comments that are being made, AI is more of an enhancement. It's definitely utilized to make the procurement experience one that is better for our stakeholders.
Yeah. And I think Manan's question about like having requiring a human to evaluate what the AI is generated for you is important.
Oh gosh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. It's probably a good question to ask vendors is like how you make sure that if you're leveraging AI that you have the human in the loop to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's your responsibility, right? You have to check the AI work because whatever data you feed it, that's what it's basing decisions off of. So it's really important to really always double check before you send out anything to the leadership and understand how that data is being gathered by AI.
Absolutely. So another question I had was how can procurement directly influence business velocity and cash flow, not just cost savings? Because I feel like cost savings has always been one of the anchors, but it's also about going to market faster and managing cash flow better. So how can procurement help with that?
I can chime in on this one because I really do think cost savings is a lagging indicator, and high performing orgs don't just focus on cost savings. I think cash flow, working capital, those are the kinds of things that really forward looking procurement groups look at. And there's 2 levers I want to talk about that may be underutilized. One is the payment terms for working capital. I've used this several times when organizations are struggling to hit their financial target. Payment terms could be a great way to free up more working capital. The one caveat I want to put here is it really needs a surgical approach. It's not pull your spend, the highest spend supplier, apply 120. You really have to look at the supplier type, what kind of service. For example, if it's a staffing firm, they pay their workers every week. They probably cannot support a 120 days. So looking at the type of supplier, the service, the business criticality is critical in making sure your payment terms like working capital program is effective and also does not, I guess, get pushback from the business if something is disrupted there. I think another space that I'm pretty close to is just contingent labor. Contingent labor, and when I say contingent labor, I'm thinking all external labor in the business that's not full time. That is another spot where businesses bleed money because it's not managed holistically. Even within procurement, it's not managed holistically because the IT procurement person may have their special. Then you may have a contingent labor program that your procurement peers are not even aligning with the rules. So really getting a handle on your contingent labor consistently from a margin, from a markup, what is on SOW, what's a contractor versus a consultant is another way to really free up cash in the business. So those are two areas that I look at. And I would say another thing is contracting, but you really have to be in advance or to do this because contracting, the contract cycle is one of the longest bottleneck on the indirect side, at least that I have seen. And having ways for procurement to use a KPI to accelerate that is another way to kind of free up capital, because depending on the kind of business you are, the longer your agreement is sitting with legal and procurement, you could be losing revenue from a client standpoint.
I love that. Linda, your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I think and I'm going to approach this from a direct procurement perspective.
Yeah.
So one of the areas, right, that we're able to free up that working capital is making sure that we partner really well with planning and forecasting. One of the areas that I see one of the largest, right, opportunity for us to reduce some of those cost flows is working with your planning group to understand, okay, how are you planning this demand, right? What are your order horizons? Then looking at what are your mid buys, right? What is your MOQ optimization strategy, right? And putting all of those things together to define how you're going to be purchasing and what your order horizons should be. Historically, procurement usually reacts, right? Demand planning, forecasting. If we were to go through the process from MPI through delivery, right? Engineering, well, first, technically, marketing, they go out, they look at the market. We need to build a product, right? They define what the market needs. Engineering, they design it. You go through the old MPI process, right? And demand planning, do we have capacity in manufacturing? That's confirmed. We look at our suppliers' capability way after. We look at how we're going to place those POs, sometimes within lead times, right? And so often what would happen when you're away from the demand planning, you're not a part of those conversations, is you're going to have a lot of expedite costs, right? You're not going to be able to leverage your mid buys. You're not going to be able, right, to figure out what your payment terms should be with your suppliers. And so being a part of that as creating an SNOP, and I've done that from a direct procurement role, creating an SNOP where I want to be a part of that conversation from the very beginning, right? I need to know what it is you plan to build, when you plan to deliver it. So I am able to make those strategic sourcing decisions, and I'm able to work with our suppliers to ensure that we're not bringing in more inventory than we need, right? Because it's going to sit on the shelf. It's going to impact our inventory turns, our inventory velocity, right? And so having an understanding E2E of how you plug in, right? Within manufacturing and the whole supply chain ecosystem is critical, and finding those areas to plug yourself in, because oftentimes you are just reacting and that inventory has to go somewhere. It's going to stay on the books, right? It's going to impact your EBITDA. Ultimately, cash flow is going to be held up in inventory that you're not able to turn, right? A couple ways we can mitigate that. So a couple of things I did when I was at Boeing, I refused to hold inventory, right? And I was in procurement, and I made that decision. And I said, okay, production control, I get you have the capacity to store it, but every rack, there's a cost to the warehouse, right? And so every pallet you store, that costs roughly $250, right? A quarter. And how many pallets are we storing? And so how do we use some more of those tactical, right, physical aspects of our inventory management systems, right, and the way that we're planning our demand upstream to optimize how we're placing those POs, right? And then additionally, do we want to outsource it, right? So one of the things I was able to do through my certification at Toyota for Lean Six Sigma was go through a 3PL case study, right? And one of the things we did, we looked at how could we reduce the amount of touch points with our inventory, right? And so there is cost to the inventory being broken down and receiving, right? And then put into the warehouse and then staged in your factory. And so was able to partner with manufacturing, engineering, because I inserted myself upstream, right, in those decisions. And we were able to source with a 3PL. So the inventory was delivered just in time at the point of use. It reduced our overtime by 20% just by implementing the 3PL. Our carrying inventory costs, and for a company as large as Boeing, and I was at Defense at the time, right? We're talking about, my goodness, like $800+ million of inventory in my warehouse. So when you are able to reduce that significantly, you will see a change in, believe it or not, right, the stock price, right? And I think understanding how we align, right, to that bottom line and the P&L is so critical, right? That working capital. So it's not just how we're procuring, it is inserting ourselves, right? Being seen as a trusted advisor because you understand E to E, how the upstream processes impacts your ability to be strategic. And then what you're doing, the folks that are executing, right, inventory tactically. So that's more of a direct procurement spin, but it's an area I've been able to make significant amount of impact, right, in a very short period of time. Is being able to connect those dots and ensuring that the right stakeholders internally, like we're meeting and we're having those conversations and we're creating cues for how we're positioning our inventory and we have a plan for every part. And interestingly enough, that's usually not a forum that procurement is invited to, which has always been a very interesting thing for me to understand and navigate, right? And so sometimes we have to insert ourselves. It doesn't impact my KPIs necessarily, but I want to make sure that I'm adding value to the business and they see me as a trusted partner, right? Now, if I'm able to support materials management, they're more than likely willing to work with me, right? To tell me where there might be excess dunnage, where I can reduce costs with freight by consolidating shipments and things like this. So, yeah.
Very interesting.
I would say really good way to build trust with your internal stakeholders, but also to let your suppliers know, like way in advance, this is what it's coming, stock up and build your supply chain to support us in what you need, right? So that trust goes both ways because I always say our role is very diplomatic. We sit between the stakeholders and the supplier. We are really there to be diplomatic and keep everybody on track.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to end it with thank you all for doing this. I think this is very educational, insightful. I wanted to end it.
Okay, is he frozen or is it me?
No, I thought it was
frozen.
I thought it was me too.
Yeah, I lost you.
It didn't help that we all stood still.
Yeah. How can business leaders better leverage procurement better? Marty, do you want to start?
Can you repeat the question? You froze for a little bit, and I couldn't.
Oh, sure. How can business leaders leverage procurement better? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and that's how we'll end it.
And I was stuck on mute. I think the biggest way business leaders can better leverage procurement is really by, we talked about the entire. I think the theme of this whole conversation was just bringing us in early and treating us more like strategic partners and not just like downstream function. I mean, I think I feel too often that procurement is brought in right after a key decision has been already made. And they're like, hey, we're at the tail end of this. Can you just get this signed or can you, start routing this for signature? But, if we get involved up front, then we can begin to start shaping that strategy and really helping them define better requirements that they may not have looked at that can hurt the business long term. A lot of these, what I'm finding with a lot of stakeholders as well, is that they're in roles for maybe 2 or 3 years and then they're going off, but the contract is still live for 5 years. I mean, and now someone else has to take up the slack for things that you didn't think about, right? Long term, my thing when I communicate with a lot of stakeholders is that we forget that 2030 is around the corner. And I'm not sure of all the panelists and when they were born, but I was born in the 80s. And who would have thought that 2030 is right here? So, how are we properly preparing for that visibility? How are we getting in front of those things? How are we locking in price trends from historic data to make sure that we don't have any issues down the line when it comes 2030 or 2035, where we may not even be with the company or we may be in another role? So just engage in procurement early, I think, is the theme of everything. If you bring us in early, we can plan out the phase and we can execute better, which will help the overall business be very fast to speed and have better cash flow throughout the cost of the contract.
I love it. Christina?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I agree with Marty. And I mean, Linda's example that she just gave is absolutely beautiful, right? Because when we know the entire process, we can help start to finish. In the end, procurement is part of supply chain, right? From the time you place an order until the order is at your door, we are involved in, that entire process. So it's not just suppliers, but understanding we are called strategic sourcing, right? To be strategic and to really be part of that bigger picture. And also to understand procurement has visibility in every department, right? It's not just your department that we need to source for. So we can lean on those other departments to understand, is the supplier, keeping up their KPIs, SLAs, how good of a supplier are they? Are they happy before we even bring a supplier to one more department, right? So having that larger picture and the visibility and understanding the spend and, optimizing the volume and understanding that we can get better pricing for your department if, we have 3-4 other departments utilizing the same supplier. So just understanding that and, preferably not to have businesses negotiate deals 3-4 times before they come to procurement, right? That's not really helping. But really changing that culture internally as well, and just being that person who has the research and it's going to deal with the supplier structure, how suppliers need to be utilized, and then your stakeholders can do day to day. So I always say, let me be the bad cop for a little bit, and then you have great 3 years of the contract or as long as the contract is, and we can agree on that. So, and they also understand the value that we bring in the analysis, the benchmarking, everything. So there's whole data science driven behind, did we get a good deal? It's not just me saying, oh, I did my best to negotiate, right? There are ways to actually validate that, and bringing that confidence to stakeholder and the company as well.
100%.
One thing I wanted to add, I think we have to accept the reality that there is a perception about procurement, right? And that we are more tactical, we are downstream. And I think I can't necessarily, right, advise another function, right, of how they could utilize us. I think we all know that. But I think from a leadership perspective, right, and from a procurement domain expertise perspective, I think individually we have a responsibility, right, to insert ourselves. And one way to do that is by being great at what you do, being curious, right, building rapport, understanding your stakeholders' needs, right, getting to know them, ask them, hey, what would you do if you had a blank check? How would you make this work? Right. And create win-wins, building that credibility, showing cross domain expertise within supply chain to understand, how you should be strategically sourcing, elevating, right, the way you're conducting yourself, right? You want to be seen as a professional strategic advisor, show up accordingly. No, I know I had to do that midway through my career because even today, I'm not necessarily one for the corporate exec speak, right? Because I get it done. I've always been a results person. And so early in my career, very tactical procurement, getting it done, right? Moved into some strategy. And I believed if I did a really good job at what I was doing, then that's what's going to get me in the room. And I think we, as we owe it to some of the junior procurement professionals coming up, that positioning, networking within your organization, creating a strong brand, right, for yourself, and just continuously being curious and developing your acumen in procurement is what it's going to take for people to approach you. And I think we need to start building our brand where we do have that domain expertise. We have that presence about us, right? And we have an advantage. We have numbers on our side. We have hard, cold, cash related numbers, right? And so having that, you're able to start off with the why every time with your stakeholders. Hey, this is why I need to be a part of demand planning. If I'm not a part of it, right, we're going to increase, right, our spend by 20, 30%. We're going to have expedite costs and things like this, right? So I think we have to take that responsibility on ourselves, unfortunately, because the perception is already out there. And I think once we're able to do that, our stakeholders will see us, as a trusted partner.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sanaya?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said. The one thing I'll just end with is relationship is a two-way street. No one gets up in the morning and said, I'm going to make Marty life a living hell. No, they're just living their life, and Marty happens to be there. And if Marty was supporting the process, still embrace it. So I think it's a two-way street. It's the business, bring us in early, but not just early, but with context. What is the outcome? What are the restraints? Because sometimes we're brought in early, but you realize 6 months later you're actually in the dark. So I think it is a two-way street, and we're on the same team trying to get to the goals for the organization.
Yeah, and you don't have to reverse engineer promises that have been made, right?
Yeah.
Shonda, and I'd love for you to end it with us.
Yeah, sure. All of the responses, in my opinion, are absolutely spot on. So 2 things I'll add to what this panel has shared. Number 1, stop sharing your budget, please. Please and thank you. Don't share your budget with the suppliers, because their response or their quote is going to come in a penny less or right on budget. And number 2 is if your procurement organization is showing up, my recommendation is to see them more as a value creator and less of a tactical sourcing department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you all. This is super insightful. Really enjoyed doing the discussion with you, and it was an honor.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. It's been a pleasure.
It's so fun. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a wonderful day.